This has been such an exciting morning so far and such an exciting 2 days so far. I'm really coming off of a high right now just from seeing the student pitches and hearing the great feedback from our expert judges. But we are transitioning into a new discussion at this point, and so I'm really excited. I've been thinking about this panel for weeks now and just really looking forward to it. If you don't know me, my name is Rebeccah Gill. I am the Merlot Presidential Chair in Communication and Entrepreneurship here at Wake. And I've got some students in the audience, so glad to see you guys here. Ooh, ooh. And you are at a panel where we are going to be discussing women and entrepreneurship. One of the interesting things is we're going to start out by asking what that exactly means. Before we get there, though, I would love to introduce our panelists. Now, you might have seen Diana Kander speak yesterday. Diana is the Director of Innovation Culture and Habits for Maddock Douglas, a Chicago-based innovation firm. In this role, she trains executives in Fortune 1000 companies to be more innovative and inspires employees to think like entrepreneurs, which my students know all about. Diana is also the author of the New York Times bestseller All in Startup, a novel outlining lessons for launching a successful business. This book has been used in over 70 colleges to teach innovation and entrepreneurship, and she's coming to us today from Kansas City, Missouri. Steve Nelson. Oh, ooh, yes, clap. Steve Nelson, I'm so excited to have him on this panel. Steve Nelson is co-founder of Carbon Inc., which is a Silicon Valley-based digital 3D manufacturing company founded in 2013. And if you are in Entrepreneurship 105 this semester, you would have heard him speak. Working at the intersection of hardware, software, and molecular science, Carbon is delivering on the promise of additive manufacturing. It was introduced simultaneously at TED 2015 and to the scientific community on the cover of Science magazine in 2015. To date, Carbon has received $422 million in funding. Its investors include Sequoia, Google Ventures, and GE. What I think is really exciting about what Steve brings to this panel, though, is that he was named in 2015 by the iconic and World Cup champion U.S. women's soccer team as the original founding member and still sole member of the advisory board of the United States Women's National Soccer Team Player Association. So he's been working with our U.S. women's team to help them gain benefits and gain some of the work.
Equity, equality, fairness.
Equity, equality, fairness, yes, that they obviously so deserve. And so hopefully that'll come out a little bit in the panel today. Rebeccah Byer is the founding executive director of the Olio. She is originally from Chicago, and she started blowing glass in 1993, and I love this bio so much. I didn't write it, she sent it to me. She started blowing glass in 1993 as a failing college student at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. She decided she wanted to open a glass-blowing school for kids right after she made Dean's List as an art major. With the Olio, Rebeccah believes that a solid business plan for products and commissioned work, as well as community classes and programs, will round out the apprenticeship program for youth. She has spent time since college in many places and industries, including film production, food service, marketing, publishing, education, admin, and nonprofits. She's lived in Winston-Salem since 2006, and we are so excited that she currently teaches social entrepreneurship for us here at Wake. And last but certainly not least, I am so excited to have Dean Rose on our panel. Dr. Simone Rose is an award-winning professor, active scholar, and associate dean for innovation and entrepreneurship at Wake Forest Law School. Dean Rose's scholarship explores the current incentive-centered framework of IP law. Prior to joining the law faculty, Dean Rose practiced law at Foley and Lardner, LLP. And in her newly appointed position as the Associate Dean for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, she's working on creating the Innovation Hub, or iHub, a multidisciplinary design thinking program that enables students, faculty, and outside professionals to work on projects and develop policy structures that enhance innovation and entrepreneurship. So clearly a super exciting panel of speakers today. So what I have let our panelists know is that I am really interested in kind of generating a very conversational, let's just talk through some of these ideas sort of panel. I don't personally have any expectations that you must answer this question or you can only speak for X amount of time. We're just going to kind of see where the flow goes and have a conversation. So as I mentioned, one of the first questions that I would love to pose to the panel is whether or not women's entrepreneurship is even a thing. So when I was asked to facilitate the panel, I started to think, why is it called women's entrepreneurship? Maybe it should just be called entrepreneurship. So that's the first maybe little bit of a challenging question. Is women's entrepreneurship a thing? Is it the same as men's entrepreneurship? And or what might be different? And whoever feels moved.
I've started. Definitely a thing. As long as there is a gender gap, and as far as minority entrepreneurship, as long as there is a gap in that area, it will always be a thing. Women have always been entrepreneurial if we look at the word from a global context. I mean, when we think about the achievements with respect to the suffragette movement, the civil rights movement, the Me Too movement, on the social entrepreneurship stage, we rock. We have more difficulty on the business entrepreneurship stage, heavily driven by the gaps and implicit bias. I mean, we occupy 1/3, we're over half of the workforce, but we are roughly 30% of the small businesses. But in the entrepreneurial space, particularly the tech space, what's uniquely difficult for us is access to funding. Of the many venture capital firms in the United States, 7% are run by women. 10% of angel investors are women. So when you think about women in this space, access to funding, implicit bias, time management, our belief in ourselves sometimes, or a lack of belief in ourselves in the business space, and access to mentoring becomes huge for women. So it's about women empowering each other. It's about the rest of society realizing that these gaps are real and participating in programs to close them. But it's a thing. It will continue to be a thing. I just finished working on a policy paper where we were looking at innovation and how innovation stems from communities that are grounded in innovation. So the top 1% who has a lot of access to innovative ideas, access to inventors, of course, that's where innovation and invention is coming from. The communities that don't have access to innovation, it doesn't matter how highly educated the members of those communities get, they still don't become inventors. They still are less likely to become entrepreneurs. So for both women and minorities, innovation, entrepreneurship remains a thing, but we're getting better.
Maybe what I'll add to that is it's not only a thing, but it needs to be focused on, and it finally has, I'd say, in the last year and a half in Silicon Valley. So there's something now called office hours that some of you may have heard something about. It's 30 pretty amazing venture capital women in Silicon Valley that basically are offering up office hours. I think it's 45-minute conversations with people that have prospective companies and ideas and want some help and want some mentoring. And it was not led by just any 30, but like 30 really terrific people. The great folks at Sequoia Capital are our lead investors. The first female partner, full partner named Jess Lee at Sequoia, is kind of one of the orchestrators of all of this. So there's now 30 women, and it was announced just yesterday, I saw it either in Forbes or Fortune, that there's now 150 female founders that have signed on as well. So not just the 30 women, but the 150, and this would be all the way from young companies to the Stitch Fix just went public CEO founder types, and they're hoping there'll be a ratio of some 10-to-1, so each person could take on at least 10 folks in 10 meetings. And again, calling it office hours, you could find it online. And I think these companies with these 150 women, and they're hoping again this could translate into maybe 2,500 conversations, These companies have raised $4 billion. So it's not people that don't know what they're doing, it's people that are kind of giving back and paying forward. So it took a long time, but it's accelerating at a pretty fast clip right now.
Diana, if I can, you have, you've had a lot of experience working with different people in different companies, and even with the Kauffman Foundation, and you've been speaking at campuses and groups all over the country. In your experience, how would you answer the question? What have you noticed?
So I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm an optimist. Everything is an opportunity to me. And so, yes, there's a lot fewer women, but for me, that was a huge plus. First of all, there's never a line to wait for the bathroom at entrepreneurship conferences. The bathroom is always available and free to use, and that's awesome. Second of all, I get into a bunch of programs that open up a lot of opportunities because I was a woman. I would go into, I wanted to get into a mentoring program that was for fast-growing companies that were going to be 0 to 100 million in 3 years, and I had a service-based business that was never going to do that, but I walked in and I was like, I bet you don't have any women in the program, and I'm a woman and I want to be in it, and they were like, okay, you can come. And so I just see opportunity in front of me, and I just think whatever you have about you, if you're an entrepreneur and you're scrappy, you have to be an entrepreneur first. You have to be good at what you do. You shouldn't get help because you're a woman, but if you're an entrepreneur and you're a woman, there's so many resources available because so many people want to be part of your story and help you, and that's really exciting.
Yeah. Well, so based on what you just said, I'm wondering, and actually, Rebeccah, I'm going to direct this one to you. So Rebeccah works more extensively with the Winston-Salem community, which I think is a really nice angle to this panel. So in terms of what you're saying, Diana, you're saying, yes, there are obstacles, but actually that might be, that creates opportunities at the same time. So for Rebeccah, I wanted to ask, what are some of the obstacles that women entrepreneurs tend to face? And what are some of the solutions that we might start to think about?
So I never grew up with any concept of my gender being a barrier, and I am a glassblower, which is a completely male-dominated field, but no one ever told me I couldn't do it because I was a woman. It never occurred to me that that was a problem. So and as a business person, I grew up in an entrepreneurial household. My parents really supported that whole lifestyle, and they are entrepreneurs. So I never felt discouraged or as a barrier until I moved to the South and found out that there were certain gender roles that I was supposed to adopt, maybe. I would literally, my glassblowing studio has a huge open garage door, which invites a lot of discussion from the public. And I've had men in suits ask me if I need help with my power tools. So I find that an interesting dynamic that I've had to get used to over the last few years. It doesn't stop me, it doesn't prevent me, it actually helps me empower other women to say, you do whatever you want, however you want to do it, and unless you're hurting somebody else, you're perfectly capable and able. And you have to set a precedent for the next generation. You have to show all of our children that they can do whatever they want. And that we need to be progressive, and we need to say, I'm gonna be whatever woman I am, because that's just how I was born. And I don't ever let my gender stop me. I've had other people, students have come in uncomfortable with a woman as a glassblowing instructor. And that's their loss, because I'm a really good glassblowing teacher. So, and that's okay for them. It's unfortunate, but I don't ever let it stop me. And I don't think any woman or man ever should. And I think men really need to empower women, and they need to say, we're going to invest in women businesses. Women are statistically more successful at their businesses, and they have a healthier workplace environment. And I don't know how true those numbers are, but I would encourage everyone to find those kinds of dynamics and balances within their own institutions and organizations.
What about anybody else? What are the obstacles and how do we solve them?
Maybe I'll think of it from an investment perspective. I don't know anything you get a return from that you don't invest in. So if you're not investing in half the population, you're kind of limiting your potential. And at Carbon, our little 3D printing company, we're approaching 300 employees. It's very engineering, computer science centric, but we're something like 38% women, and we'd be by triple a role model in Silicon Valley. And the way to do that is to be very intentional about it from the beginning. And of course, great people attract great people, and so much of what we do is not just qualify or apply for the job, but people bring their own networks. And we're fortunate that we have a bunch of Tesla, Apple, Google kind of people. And if you get some key people in important roles, they bring their friends, and as I said, 38% should be maybe 50 or 55, but we're proud that we're viewed as a role model by being very intentional about it.
Nice, yeah. Dean Rose.
I was going to say I applaud these efforts because I think this is how we're going to change the dynamic. But the existing dynamic is still problematic. So I think in order to facilitate change, we have to accept that we're not where we should be. So if you look at the VC numbers, in 2016, $58.2 million was given to male startups. 1.46, and it's billion, I said million, billion. 1.46 billion went to females. Now, part of that is the number of females going into this space, as Diana pointed out. And enough of us aren't aggressive and assertive and confident, and lots of it stems from confidence. But in Silicon Valley right now, only 5% of the startups are headed by women, and 11% of the executive positions. There's still a great wage gap, there's still a great gender gap. Google was asked to do a study in 2016, second most valuable corporation, to really confirm a lot of this data, and they said it was too expensive and burdensome. So I think we have to make our voices known. I think we can sit in this room, and this room is entrepreneurs, and everybody's excited. But I think we also have to own the fact that we've got a long way to go, and I think we're doing much better today than we were 10 years ago. As to men empowering women, when I was in engineering school at Penn, I had 2 mechanical engineering professors ask me, why did women want to be engineers? They didn't get it. I was raised in a family of entrepreneurs where women were told, and Jamaicans, you can do anything you want. Don't let anyone stop you from reaching your goal. And yes, it was easy for me to push through, but there were 5 other women with me. I was the only African-American female that graduated in my class in all engineering disciplines at Penn. In the 80s, so it wasn't like it was the dark ages. And we, now Penn has advanced women in engineering. They have the actual program where they start in high schools and they try to mentor and recruit young people. There are lots of K-12 STEM programs out there today. So the dynamic is changing, but like I said, let's own that we've got a longer way to go than we might be perceiving while we look at all these wonderful things happening today. The gap, I want to see that gap closed. From the innovation perspective, the policy data shows if underserved minorities and women were encouraged more at earlier stages to get in the innovative entrepreneurial space, we could quadruple our economy. So, let's move it up.
Yeah, yeah. As you're talking, I love that you're giving a little bit of a historical explanation. You're saying in the 80s, this was happening, what's happening now. And so one of the questions I would love for the panel to think about is what has changed around the conversation with women's entrepreneurship? I feel like, women's entrepreneurship has obviously been around for centuries, right? It's been around just as long as entrepreneurship has been around. But it feels to me that it's been more of a topic of conversation, or at least becoming more public in the past, 10 years, 15 years. And I wondered if you had any thoughts as to why. What's changed now that we're putting so many resources into it, or paying more attention to it now than maybe we used to? And I don't know, Diana, maybe you could give us some thoughts.
Can I answer a different question?
Totally. Yep. Yeah. We're super free flowing.
I don't know.
Friday morning.
I came here from another country, and I'm not very old, so I don't know what's changed about women's entrepreneurship. But I know I take on student entrepreneurs like every year. I try to mentor students because it's like my favorite group of people to work with. And I mentor both women and men, and my conversations with the women are very different than the conversations with the men. And so that's like the most striking thing to me is whenever I meet with the men, we talk about the business and generating profits and marketing. And whenever I meet with women, we're talking about self-doubt and like personal feelings. And that's just my experience of what's happened to me. But like I too had a lot of self-doubt when I started out. And it's funny, I have this entrepreneur who's graduated a long time ago, but we still meet regularly, And she, like, her big problem was that she would apologize after every sentence, like all the time. And so we implemented this thing where if she said she was sorry, she had to do 5 push-ups wherever we were. Like, even if she was on the phone, I'd be like, wherever you are, put the phone down, do 5 push-ups. And she got really strong. That was exceptional. And I just had lunch with her this week, and she said at lunch, I was like, it's disgusting here. I'm not gonna make you do it, but when you get back to the office, you gotta do 5 push-ups. But like, that's what we were working on, as opposed to which marketing program. It's just as important. Like, I feel like whenever I mentor women entrepreneurs, it's like, you can do it. And then whenever I speak with men entrepreneurs, and it's not like 100% of the time, but it's just what I found to be the case. But it was just as true for me. Like, I needed that when I was starting out. So I just feel like there are like a little bit of a different needs and for people.
Yeah. And I think that's it, is that whatever's changed is that I have a bigger pool of people that I can relate to and understand the different challenges that I'm experiencing. And I did spend the first 3 years of my business apologizing for things that we don't do. And I have a weird, kooky business, but I've always had a very specific vision and mission for it, and it's successful as what it truly is at its core. And when I let people, anybody, but a lot of times men, get me derailed off of, you know what you should do? Those were the words I heard for 2 years solid, until finally I was like, no. I stopped making apologies. I stopped making excuses. I started feeling a lot more confident in my vision, in my practice, and I do practice what I preach. And I believe in it as a bigger, long-term, more investive kind of business. And when I can always do that and feel strong about it, I am more successful every single day. But I needed my people, either really supportive men who could relate and empathize, or women who were going through that kind of struggle and could see, and mentors I have found along the way in incredible ways that have helped me stay strong and stop apologizing.
Yeah. Steve,
what I
experience.
might add to that is I'm more focused on this last year and a half where Silicon Valley, I think, has been far more intentional. The dirty little secret in the Silicon Valley industry is that 8 venture firms have returned 51% of the returns of the market. So it's really about 8 firms. There's 2,000 other firms that are 4%, and it's the 8, and that would include Sequoia, Greylock, Benchmark, to name 3 that you would heard of, have been very intentional about bringing in full partners, thinking that, again, we're underinvesting, we're missing this opportunity, we haven't been proactive about all of that. So first of all, I think there's a special focus. I'm seeing firms, even like McKinsey, who I know really well, it's kind of their issue of the almost of the firm is equity, equality, fairness, diversity. Are we doing enough? And that's probably half of their population as well. And then I saw a little forward to the 60 Minutes that's coming out on Sunday. Mark Benioff, who's the Salesforce founder, amazingly successful entrepreneur. If you ever go to San Francisco, you'll see this crazy tower. That's basically the Salesforce Tower. But he's probably the champion of almost all social causes out there, probably as enlightened as anybody. And I saw kind of a little forward through a video that's coming out on Sunday, so I guess check out 60 Minutes, that he did a survey of people even at Salesforce and realized, back to the men, women, equity, equality, fairness, he had a $6 million problem that he just kind of solved by just saying that's what we're going to go do. And then he said he solved it once 3 years ago, but they've acquired a bunch of companies and they kind of redid the survey, and they had another $6 million problem. So part of it is, he says, I can't imagine not investing equally in half of the opportunity. So he just said 6 million, and by the way, we need role models like that. So I think that's pretty terrific.
With your experience with the U.S. women's soccer team, what did you hear from them in terms of maybe the most frustrating comment that or experience that they had with searching for equity and fairness?
Yeah, this would have been another 60 Minutes caliber issue that you may have seen. So it turns out that I jokingly refer to it, I have my own 23andMe. It's the 23 women and me, trying to help a little bit with my advice. They weren't being treated fairly by their employer. U.S. Soccer is think of now you're at Google and you have 2 people in the same job. women and men. The men, by the way, as of 2 years ago, were 16th in the world and just didn't qualify for the World Cup. Women have been pretty much perennial #1 since the 90s. I called in some favors at McKinsey. They gave us a 2-year, basic 2 years of free work to dig into this, of young partners that wanted to help on this equity, equality, fairness. Here's what we found, and here's what ended up happening. I'll take a short version of it. Same job. The women are better than the men, but they're both world class. The women were paid by the same employer. Women were paid 98% less for the same job. So the way U.S. Soccer tried to fix it was they were more popular, so they played 40% more matches. Think of all these friendlies. In order to only be 48% less paid. So think of it again, I'm putting my corporate hat on. That's like the men work 40 hours a week, the women work 56 hours a week, doing your 40% math, in order to only be 48%. And now to make it even worse, men flew private, women flew coach, men stayed in Four Seasons and Ritz's, women stayed in Marriott's. Per diem, if you know what per diem is, men got a bigger per diem under the banner that they ate more. So we fired people, we brought in the people that did the NFL collective bargaining agreement. We had 23 sessions. The women got a 70 to 110% raise. That would have been, which is great. You can read, New York Times has done a couple of features on these people really kind of leading the cause, but they also got their rights back. So now they're very interested in creating a global lifestyle brand company. Think of Honest Company, think of lifestyle fitness, think of training, think of anything that they could create their own brand. So basically they're getting paid fairly and they got all their rights back. So I brought a bunch of them, including Mia Hamm, Mia joined us, and we were in Sequoia offices with Jess Lee, who's this big champion, and with Mary Meeker at Kleiner Perkins, and a lot of interest in trying to help something that by definition will always be owned and run by women. Mm-hmm. So part of it is, again, being intentional, and then I'd say all people aren't created equally relative to helping you, so you want to go to the best people to try to help you.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
What would have happened if a female had tried to advocate and who get McKinsey to come in and do the work? Like, what difference do you feel like it makes to have a male?
I think the cause is so important that I think, now it happened to be a really good personal friend and run North America of McKinsey, and so it was the right cause, the right relationship. I think it could have been a woman if they knew him in this case. But they did say yes and got a bunch of volunteers that wanted to work pro bono. And the only reason we have this data, it was always available, but if you ask for it, but to kind of find out how ugly it was. And then we had 23 negotiating sessions later and got them treated fairly. Most importantly, they got the best part is getting the upside. You know, they could go build something that could be really phenomenal that'll always be a woman-owned company in the future. So part of it is getting the right to do stuff that nothing was happening with. It was just sitting on the ground. These rights weren't being utilized at all.
We need more use.
Well, and just
Rebeccah,
to answer
yeah.
your question, I think one of the biggest shifts between the 80s and now is the internet. It's an instant PR nightmare. And I think companies need to be ahead of the curve and proactive. And as a social entrepreneur, I think we can look at the exact instances where shifts are happening internally and externally, but the internet and Twitter is an instant PR nightmare if you don't handle things well. Yeah. And, you know, protesting is immediate now. The NFL was a nonprofit until like 3 years ago. That was a PR shift because the public demanded that the NFL stop operating as a nonprofit.
Wow. Okay.
So,
Well, let me pick up on that then. So the idea that social media and the internet, instant PR nightmare. Dean Rose, you work with IP. Is that something that has shifted in terms of intellectual property and entrepreneurship? Does that matter? How does that matter?
I think the internet has enabled a lot of young people to get into the IP space more successfully. Mm-hmm. I mean, not just the internet, just computer science in general, right? So what would happen, women are only 22% of law. So we're not heavily represented as you might think in the field of law as far as partnerships, people who have control. And what happened in law eventually was a lot of women who were partners, some decided that time management, I want a family, I'm expected to play a certain role, unfortunately. And how can I balance this? So, like Stephanie Kimbrough, and we're talking like 2009 to 2010, and others looked at creating virtual law firms.
Oh.
And the way they did it was kind of similar to what Diana talks about in her book. I'm an All-In fan. Stan Mandela gave me a copy. They went to their clients and said, "What are your concerns in the practice of law?" You know, and a big one was privacy. And so, if I can create a network that we don't communicate always by email, you don't come to my lofty mahogany office to talk to me, would you be happy? The answer was yes. And so women led the charge in the virtual law firm space. Now there are men, they don't dominate, but there's a high percentage of men now in the virtual law practice space as well. In the IP field, we've got an entrepreneur sitting right there, Raina. And what Raina was able to do coming straight out of law school was tap into those clients who had unique IP issues as entrepreneurs. And of course, everybody's heard of cryptocurrency and the blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where she was able to really make a name, continue to publicize utilizing social media, right? I picked her up on plenty of sites talking about issues regarding the blockchain. And so I think young entrepreneurial lawyers are able to access clients, better engage with clients through the internet and various other CS application space.
Mm-hmm.
As far as trademarks goes, there is a Trademarks Now, I think it's called, an app, a platform where you can use the internet to do all of this elaborate searching that used to cost going to private consultants and spending thousands of dollars. Our clinical students are using Trademarks Now to help small business clients. There's Lex Machina in the patent space that gives a lot of predictive analytic data and assistance with drafting patent applications, figuring out your projected success in litigation. So the internet helps, but so does the entire tech platform.
Yeah.
Emerging technologies are enhancing the ability for entrepreneurs to grow, as well as the ability for young lawyers to make some noise in the space.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like it's a double-edged sword. You know, there's, like you said, it creates all these opportunities, but then, as Rebeccah's pointing out, like that doesn't always work in a particular person's favor.
I would comment that it is in everybody's favor, though.
Okay.
I mean, I think transparency is good in business and in progressive, movement towards the future.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you can operate in a fairly transparent way, I use the term capitalism with a conscience to describe social entrepreneurship. I think capitalism can work if you think about the future and plan it and all of the destructive habits that have occurred in the last 100 years. If we can be proactive and ahead of the curve, we could possibly make a better dent in our future.
Mm-hmm. Diana, last night you came out as a millennial. So I wondered, what's your thought on this? I mean, is the internet is this the next democratic space for entrepreneurs of all different backgrounds and sizes and colors and
I feel
genders?
Like, the reason things become democratic is when, women are going to have a much better time in the workplace when women are in charge. So I worked at a law firm. I was a young associate, and 90% of the managing board was all men. And so if you were a woman who wanted to have a child and work part-time was like 50 hours a week. That's part-time being an associate at a law firm because those rules were designed by men. And now I work at a consulting firm that does innovation. Our firm is 70% women. The president's a woman. Almost like 30% of us work part-time as consultants because we care about a lot of other things in our lives. But we are like the dream team. We're like the best consultants who can come in because we do it on our own time. And when we need to work on a project, we go and we do the best job. But that's because we can do that for 3 days a week and then not do that for the other 2. And everybody inside the company gets it. And the law firm was not that environment. In fact, my husband has this funny story. He was also a lawyer, and we graduated law school at the same time, and he was interviewing at the same firms, and they didn't know we didn't have the same last name at the time, and so he, at one lunch, said, I noticed you don't have very many women partners in the firm. And the managing partner who was there, and there were like 2 women at the table too, and he was like, well, women make a decision whether they want to continue on the leadership track or stay home. And my husband was like, I'd like to order dessert, please. I'm definitely not working here, so I'd like to make this meal as expensive as possible. So.
I like that. I want to just take a minute to take a page out of Laura's book. Question from the audience. Does anybody, something come to mind, something burning that you want to pose to everybody? Yeah.
So, like many of you women up here, I was also raised in a very empowering family, Like I had stories of Rachel Carson and Marie Curie from a young age. And I went to Wellesley too. So, very much my life was about women's empowerment. But still, and I studied those issues, but still, when I had a child, suddenly I felt like I realized what it is to be a woman and be discriminated against. So can you talk about, it just blew my mind in a way I couldn't understand, even at Wellesley, focusing on women's studies. Can you guys speak to that?
Can you explain for us men in the room what you're talking about? What are you talking about?
I love that you're asking about it.
I'll let the panelists explain.
Okay, so I'm a little data queen over here, a little nerd. Anyway, if you look at how women are viewed after they have children in the tech space, the overwhelming majority of them categorize tech as being family unfriendly. The minute I got pregnant, now I experienced law firm life just like Diana did. So it's sad that it hasn't changed in all this time. The minute you're pregnant, you're automatically on the mommy track. You're not serious about your future. And please don't bring the N-word, the nursing word, into the environment. And these were women that were actually interviewed saying this. And the minute this happens, you begin to be taken less seriously, unless there are women in the boardroom. There are women at the top that have these same sensitivities, have struggled with these same issues, and are determined to view things differently. So my daughter works for about a 120-person law firm in the Raleigh area. They have 2 women on the compensation committee, right? And 4 women, I think, on the hiring committee. She works in labor and employment, in the labor and employment department, which is chaired by a female. Her experience at that firm is strikingly different from my experience at Big Law.
Yeah.
And I think that is because of the role. And the women there don't even think they have a true voice. They're like, this is not enough. we need to be more sensitive. Now, Big Law is somewhat sensitive in that there are females who do rise to partnership that have children, but talk to them and they will tell you the sacrifice that they made to get that position, that they sacrificed their children. They had nannies who took their children to the soccer games and all the wonderful things. And, men will say, well, we have to do the same thing. But if both people are doing it, then what's happening to the child? So I think some of it is just, I never had to occupy that space as a man. And I don't think about things that way. The other part of it is the true implicit bias of what it means to be a woman with a child.
Can I just add to that? Just a simple explanation of how women and men are seen differently. If you're a man and you take your child who's 5 years old to the grocery store and the child is wearing pajamas and socks and no shoes, people at the grocery store will be like, that father is spending time with his kid. And that's great. And if you're a mom who takes a child to the grocery store in pajamas and no shoes, they'll be like, that is the worst mother in the world. And I've seen that in the entrepreneurship space. My friend would bring his son and hold him in a carrier while he gave a speech, and people would be like, Father of the Year. And if a woman brought a child to an event, they'd be like, she can't take care of her business. And I would just say, like, the way we fix that is through entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is the great equalizer. Like, you set your own hours, you do whatever you want. I work from home. I make the rules, I employ other people, and I set the rules for how people are going to do it, and it's the great equalizer. To me, like, entrepreneurship is the ultimate woman empowering tool. And number two, women need to be, like, just go to the top and own the companies and get to the management team, and then we're going to fix everything.
We're trying.
We have a question from one of my students.
Do you think that getting maternity and paternity leave like equalized and having kind of a longer time to possibly help the situation? Because I know a lot of European countries give a long time, and I know some tech companies, I think Netflix is allowing for a year. So do you think that stuff like that could maybe help with our lives, or do you think it's going to make it worse?
I think paternity did help with the bias because it sort of brought a greater sensitivity and awareness. I will tell you, my law firm always had a so-called long maternity leave. You weren't expected to take it though, right? So in all the publications, we advocate for quality of life, and we advocate for gender parity. But the reality was, and I had a friend who was dictating a memo as she was getting wheeled into the delivery room. And she came back 2 weeks, she had 3 months, but she came back 3 weeks after because she felt if she didn't come back within that time, she was going to be, her career would be jeopardized. I think it does make a difference and it makes a statement. That's what it makes. But we have to put some power behind those statements, and we have to really, right.
Just to comment as an entrepreneur and as a woman and as a mother, I started working about 3 days after I gave birth. I've been a serial entrepreneur since I was in my late teens, so I've never not worked. And being a mother and working at the same time was never an option or a question because I love to work. And if you're not an entrepreneur who loves to work, I'm not sure you're the success of your business. And as a mother, I think it's okay to find that balance. I couldn't possibly stand a 3-month maternity leave. It would drive me crazy.
Yeah, I second that.
I wouldn't know what to do with myself.
Ever did nothing during their maternity.
But see, women
It's
in
just if you don't like your job,
entrepreneurship-
if you're an entrepreneur, it's awesome.
Well, and as the executive director of a business, I get to dictate how those rules apply to my staff as well. And we are predominantly women who run the shop. And when my shop director needs to leave for her child, it's okay. I know that she is a quality employee, so she's going to step it up in other ways and other places. And she'll work from home if she needs to. But as a woman and as a mother, it's never an option for me to take a break. I work sometimes 7 days a week. And that also means that I get to take a Wednesday morning off. And that's the beauty of being in charge of my life and my business and balancing. I'm a single mother. I got a divorce at the same time I opened a business. And doing that is a constant juggle, and it's a constant prioritization of my time because that's my most valuable resource. And I think as a woman, as a mother, you set the tone, you set the precedence, and you set the balance for your team, and you prioritize family because it is important.
I do realize we aren't going to solve all the problems in 1 hour, but I think one of the things that you're bringing to the surface is, in this conversation right here, is that not all solutions we might come up with are going to benefit everybody in exactly the same way. And so, one thing we haven't even started to get into is, the intersectionality of entrepreneurship, right? So not just gender, but also ethnicity and geography, and whether or not you're doing an innovative business or a replicative business. But what could we maybe start to think about in terms of how to provide opportunities, that recognizing that it also can't be one size fits all? How do we balance that?
Well, I think that's part of it, is finding quality people who really do believe in your organization. If you're not running your own show, You need to find people who really believe in it and live it and absorb it, and you trust their level of time commitment in terms of what their quality of work is like. Because the 40-hour work week is kind of irrelevant now. With technology and communication and this constant access, you really have to find a balance. And if you don't prioritize your life and your self-care, that's what a woman's approach will do for you too. For men, is basically say, you do need time with your families and with your spouse, and you need that time away. I'm forced to because of my kids, but I also would do it anyway. I think it's a priority for everybody. And balance in entrepreneurship is key, because you're not going to run a good ship if it's always needing some oil. So
you're saying you have to make sure you know what is priority for you. You're also suggesting that there are some ways that an organization might help others. As an entrepreneur, you can help others also kind of balance that. So thoughts from the rest of the panel, is it something that the individual needs to really just make sure they have a good grasp on, or what might a company do, or if you're an employee working for an entrepreneur, what would you like to see perhaps?
I think in the corporate space, one of the big issues is getting to the level, having enough women at the level to facilitate change. Because if you're talking about the law firm structure, it's associate and partner. Mm-hmm. And I can be the associate who wants all the quality time with my family and feel like I should do this, but I have to hit a certain billable hour number. In big law, a lot of times they want you to be present. Working at home is nice, technology is nice, but we want to see your face because we're here. And so when you get more women at that level, I think you can facilitate change. One, from educating, right? The people who just, the men who just, that's not what they're accustomed to being sensitive to. I mean, the same issue goes with race as well. And so when you get to be part of the discussion and you enlighten the rest of the group and you're willing to stand on your platform, we need to really facilitate and act on a better work-life balance. Yes, this female partner just had a baby, she should be able to do a lot of her work at home. Mm-hmm. And it shouldn't be a question. If she's making her hours, what's the problem? If her clients are happy, what's the problem? And I think that attitude, 32 of the Fortune 500 companies are headed by women. So we're definitely moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
But we need to get more people, more women on the boards of directors, right? More women in the space where they can facilitate all of this.
And it sounds like you're suggesting we need to be intentional about looking at the individual person, so not just a blanket policy. All women, you can or should or must do this, but let's look at exactly what you said. Is she getting her work done? Are her clients happy? And kind of making maybe more individualized decisions. Obviously, I want to make sure that we pay attention to people's time, and I know that the Advisory Council is about to move on to a meeting, but I was told that there's one more question, so we'll let, I didn't see you. Yes?
It was just a quick observation.
Do it, make it.
And I wanted to say out loud that my perspective is unique, and I so appreciate that, but I do think it's a nuance. And I actually had the privilege of working for a while for a gentleman in a startup for about 10 years of my career when I was having children at Kelly Baby Chance, and he was the biggest advocate for me, and I was talented and I was additive, and every time I had a child he's like, what do you want now?
Huh.
And he just, and I'll be honest, there were women in the firm that were not as helpful because their experience was not like that, and and these were very bright, talented leaders in the firm, and they were not as helpful to me as Mike Dory was. And so I'm very conscious, because it was kind of like they didn't have it and they wanted me to stay on, but it was kind of like, how come I didn't get that, a little bit. And so I think there is a role for women, now that I'm in a different part of my career, I have to be very conscious of women that report to me, or that I'm supportive when they're given privileges maybe that I didn't have. And I would also add that as women that are having children, I have 2 boys, right? And they're watching me now in my career, and I do think there's hope in that it won't just be women that can empower women. I have faith that my two boys will one day be very empowering colleagues and employers of women. So I just want to kind of broaden that and actually encourage young women in the room, you know, too, as they go in their careers, they always have to look out for, even if you might not have had it, make sure you advocate for the women that are coming behind you and cheer for them when they're getting things that you don't.
Yeah.
So, and I'm happy to have your reaction to that. I'm not saying that it's a mantra.
Oh, I agree.
It's great.
100%.
I would add to that. I would say the most contentious professional relationships I've had have been with women. And the greatest people who supported my career have been men. My investors have been men. The people that mentored me have been men. And at the first time that one of those contentious situations happened, I was very confused. I read this incredible book that's, I think, out of print now, but it's called In the Company of Women. And it's all about the dynamics of women working with other women and just how they think about the situation. And it totally opened my eyes. But the dynamics are very different, so you have to understand the difference between the two as well. And so, like, women in the position of power makes a big difference inside of the structure and the expectations, but for sure in mentoring relationships, like, that's something where women can do a much, much better job.
Yeah. We've hit on so much today, and my head is spinning a little bit. So, you know, we've talked about not just structural issues, but individual decisions that a person might make. We've talked about finding support, finding mentorship, finding that person, prioritizing, and so on and so forth. So I'm just really hoping that we were able to give the team here today, the group here today, some good things to think about as you go forward into your own entrepreneurial journeys or into supporting the people in your life who are entrepreneurial. Obviously, a huge round of applause for Diana, Steve, Rebeccah, and Simone.